Hi, I'm Lily. If you've ever felt overlooked or unappreciated for the work you've done, then you're not alone. I want to share my story with you, one that changed how I see myself and how I see the world of work. 6 years. That's how long I poured my soul into that company. I spent countless hours fixing their broken systems, making their products run smoother, and carrying the weight of projects no one else could handle. Yet when I asked for what I'd earned a simple raise, I was met with laughter. Not the kind of laughter that made you feel welcome or valued, but the kind that made you feel small. You're essential, they said, but it wasn't the kind of essential that earns you more, just the kind that keeps you on standby. I wasn't asking for the moon. I wasn't even asking for a promotion. All I wanted was recognition for what I had done, for what I had sacrificed. But they didn't see it that way. Instead, the CEO chuckled, zipped up his pants, and told me that raises were for bigger picture thinkers. And in that moment, I realized everything I had worked for was taken for granted. The worst part? I never even signed the non-disclosure agreement they had shoved in front of me for 6 years, claiming it was just a formality. It was all just a game to them. A game where they took everything I gave, and when it was time to give me a slice of the pie, they handed me crumbs. But that wasn't the part that stung the most. The most painful part was the realization that I had been played. They didn't care about me. They cared about the work I did, and that was it. It all started when I was going through some old files on my hard drive. I was looking for anything to distract me from the overwhelming frustration of everything that had happened at work. As I sifted through forgotten folders, something caught my eye, a dusty file labeled "Old Crap, Don't Delete." I almost didn't open it. It had been years since I even thought about what was in that folder. But something inside me pushed me to click, and when I did, there it was, my patent. The words jumped out at me, U.S. Patent Number 10, followed by a string of numbers that meant nothing to anyone but me. This was it. The patent for the load balancing system I had spent countless sleepless nights designing. I had filed it on my own during one of the back-end summits in 2019, when everyone else had been too busy drinking or complaining about deadlines. I remembered the moment clearly. The senior architect had passed out drunk in a beanbag chair, and the legal team had completely checked out. They had all left the burden of filing the patent to me, and I had done it quietly, without asking for anything in return. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. I was young, idealistic, and focused on getting the job done. I figured it was just another piece of paperwork that would get buried in the bureaucracy. But now, looking at it, I saw it for what it truly was, a weapon. A weapon that could destroy everything they had built on my back. I sat there for a long time staring at the patent, and then it hit me. I owned this. This code, this idea. Everything that had made their company run smoothly for years, it was mine. They didn't have the rights to it. They hadn't even acknowledged it. They had taken it for granted, assumed I would keep quiet, and keep working for them without ever asking for what I was due. But I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The next few hours were a blur. I opened every document I could find related to the project, piecing together my work, verifying timestamps and confirming that everything I had written was solid. I had proof that the code was mine. Proof that I had created the architecture that had powered their entire infrastructure. I wasn't just an employee. I was the one who had built the foundation they stood on, and it was time to make sure they paid for taking me for granted. I had no intention of making any rash moves. I was done being the person who just accepted the crumbs they threw at me. I wasn't going to jump into a legal battle blindly. Instead, I needed a strategy. I needed to make sure that when I acted, I did it in a way that would make them regret every moment they had ignored me. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could: source code logs, email correspondence, deployment history, anything that could show my contributions. I carefully covered my tracks, making sure no one would trace this back to me until I was ready. I had to be meticulous. Every action I took had to be calculated or they would catch on. I needed a rival company, someone who could take my patent and use it to destroy them. I thought about it for a while, considering the companies in the industry who could benefit from what I had created. Then I remembered Artemis Systems, a competitor across the street. They were known for being innovative and willing to disrupt the market. They could use my technology to leapfrog their competitors. But the best part? They would never see me coming. With Artemis in mind, I started planning. I knew they had a reputation for being bold for playing by their own rules. I reached out to a former colleague there who had always respected my work. He was still connected to the company, and I knew he would understand the value of what I had. I wasn't just going to give them my patent, I was going to make them pay for it. But I also knew that if they saw me coming, they would fight back. So I kept everything under wraps, working in the shadows as if my entire world depended on this one move. Every day, I logged in under a fake name, used a VPN routed through Iceland, and made sure I left no trace of my plans. I couldn't afford to slip up. Every piece of code I sent to Artemis was carefully encrypted, and every communication was sent using a burner email. I couldn't let them find out, not yet. If I did this right, they would never know what hit them. I wasn't just fighting for a patent, I was fighting for respect. I was fighting to take back control of my life and my career. I had been the one to build it all from the ground up, and now it was time for me to own it. This was no longer just about money or recognition. It was about showing them that I wouldn't be overlooked anymore. In the end, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to sell them the patent, I was going to destroy them with it. I was going to take everything they had worked for and turn it into a weapon. It was time for me to take back what was mine, and this time, I wouldn't back down. The moment I clicked send on that email, my heart raced. I had done it. I had sent the formal licensing violation notice to my old company, letting them know they were in breach of intellectual property rights. I watched the seconds tick by as the email processed, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. It was the fear of what might happen next, how they might retaliate, how far they would go to protect themselves. But there was also the exhilaration of knowing I was finally taking control, finally doing something about all the years of being used and dismissed. It took a few hours for the first response to come through, and when it did, I felt the weight of their arrogance. They tried to brush it off like it was nothing, like I was just some disgruntled employee with nothing to stand on. I could almost hear the chuckles through the email as they forwarded it to their legal team, claiming it was miscommunication and asking for clarification on the supposed violation. They didn't know what they were dealing with yet. They had no idea how serious I was. They didn't know that I had proof, solid, undeniable proof, and that I was ready to fight. The next few days felt like a blur. My inbox flooded with responses from their legal team, each email more desperate than the last. They tried to downplay it, offering vague explanations and brushing off my claims as if they were inconsequential. But I wasn't buying it. The more they scrambled, the more I realized just how deep they were in denial. They didn't understand that I had taken control of the situation now that this wasn't just some idle complaint. This was the beginning of something much bigger. I could see it all unfolding, what was happening inside their company, how they were reacting to my move. They started to panic. I knew they would. When you steal from someone and think you can get away with it, you don't expect them to come back stronger. As I watched the chaos erupt from the outside, it felt like every moment was part of a bigger plan, a carefully executed step in my path to revenge. By the time the internal memos started circulating, I could feel the pressure building on them. Word had gotten out about the violation, and everyone from the CTO to the product managers was now talking about it. The whispers had begun in the hallways, and I could sense the tension mounting. They were scrambling to figure out how to handle this, how to cover up the mess they had made. But it was too late for them. I wasn't just another disgruntled employee. I was a force they had never seen coming. My move was calculated, and every piece of evidence I had gathered was now a part of a much larger game. I could almost hear their nervous chatter, their internal debate on whether they could just buy me off or whether they would have to actually face the consequences of their actions. They didn't know what hit them, but they would soon. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The legal team finally acknowledged the depth of the issue. They couldn't deny it anymore. They had to confront the fact that they had been operating under false pretenses for years, using code that wasn't theirs. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. They had spent years talking about innovation, about building the next big thing, but it was built on my work, the work I had done without recognition. And now it was time for them to pay. The phone calls started. I could hear the desperation in their voices. They wanted to talk this through, to find a way to settle this quietly. But there was no talking this through. Not anymore. I had waited too long for this moment, and I wasn't about to back down. They thought they could brush me off with a few empty apologies. They had no idea that the storm they had created would be far worse than they imagined. The panic spread within the company like wildfire. The legal team was overwhelmed trying to find a way to fix the mess without making it public. They were debating whether to settle or go to court. But I knew they didn't want to go to court. They didn't want this to get out, didn't want the world to know the truth. That's when I realized just how far I could push them. I had them cornered, and now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I could almost feel the weight of the decision as it hung in the air. They knew they were in too deep. They knew they had underestimated me. I could feel the excitement bubbling up inside me as I watched them fall apart, knowing that I was the one in control now. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. This was my fight, my moment, and I wasn't going to let them walk away without paying for what they had done. The moment the licensing violation gained public attention, everything started to unravel for them. It wasn't just a legal issue anymore. It had become a public spectacle. Articles started popping up, and tech blogs were buzzing with news of the patent dispute. They were the talk of the industry, but not in the way they had hoped. For a company that prided itself on innovation, it was a blow to the ego that they weren't prepared for. Their entire facade built on my code was crumbling. At first, they tried to deny everything. They issued statement after statement, each one more desperate than the last, trying to downplay the violation. It's a misunderstanding, they said. We're handling it internally, they claimed, but no one was buying it anymore. The public wasn't interested in their excuses, they were more interested in the truth. And the truth was that they had built their success on stolen intellectual property. The irony was impossible to ignore. Everything they had boasted about their cutting-edge technology, their game-changing infrastructure, was built on something they didn't even own. And now that very thing was tearing them apart. As their statements failed to quell the storm, the company's leaders scrambled to control the damage. I could see it all from the outside, watching them fall over each other, trying to clean up the mess they had made. The CEO, once so confident, was now taking calls at odd hours, trying to figure out how to salvage their reputation. Meanwhile, their legal team was running in circles, trying to come up with a plan to undo what had been done. They were overwhelmed, panicking, and each move they made only made things worse. They thought they could silence me, but they didn't realize that they were the ones now drowning in their own lies. It was a strange feeling watching them flounder. I had spent years feeling invisible, like my work didn't matter. But now, everything they had worked for, their success, their public image, was in jeopardy because of me. My intellectual property, something they had stolen and claimed as their own, was now the very thing that could destroy them. It felt like poetic justice in a way. They had underestimated me, thinking I was just another cog in their machine, and now that same machine was falling apart because of my work. But it wasn't all satisfaction. There was a bittersweet feeling that came with watching their downfall. As much as I felt vindicated, as much as I reveled in the irony of it all, there was still the part of me that wished it hadn't come to this. I didn't want to be the person responsible for tearing everything down. But they had forced my hand. I had tried to play by their rules to fit in and work hard. But they never saw me for who I really was. Now I was the one who had brought them to their knees, and it was hard not to feel the weight of that responsibility. The tension between me and my old colleagues was palpable. I could feel the whispers, the judgment, the resentment building in the air. Some of them were still clinging to the idea that the company was in the right, that I was somehow the villain in all of this. Others, however, saw the truth. They knew that my contributions had been the foundation of everything they had achieved. But it didn't matter now. The damage had been done, and they were just as stuck as the leadership was. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal one too. I had spent years believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved myself, things would get better. But they hadn't. In the end, it wasn't about working harder. It was about standing up for myself. And I had done that. Watching them struggle trying to repair the damage while I was free to move forward was the most satisfying feeling I had experienced in a long time. The downfall was quick, but it was inevitable. Their stock price started to dip, and the investors began to question their future. The more they tried to control the narrative, the worse it got. By the time they admitted the truth, it was too late. The damage was irreversible. They had spent years building a reputation based on lies, and now they were paying the price. For me, it was a moment of quiet triumph. I had won. But there was no cheering, no celebration. Just a sense of closure, of finally seeing my work acknowledged in the way it should have been all along. It wasn't about the money or even the recognition. It was about taking back what was mine and watching them try and fail to recover what they had taken from me. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized it wasn't just about getting even. It wasn't just about taking what was mine or watching them fall. The real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in what I discovered about myself along the way. For so long, I had been willing to sacrifice my time, my energy, and my intellect for a company that never saw my worth. And when they refused to recognize me, when they dismissed my efforts as just another cog in their machine, I didn't fight back. I quietly accepted my role, convinced that somehow, someday, I'd get the recognition I deserved. But in the end, I had to fight for it. I had to claim it for myself. This journey taught me that the most important thing I could ever own was my self-worth. It wasn't enough to just be good at my job or be the best at what I do. I had to own it. I had to recognize my own value before anyone else would. I had let them take advantage of me for too long, and when I finally stood up for myself, it wasn't about making them pay. It was about finally realizing I was worth more than they ever gave me credit for. Reclaiming my intellectual property wasn't just a legal victory. It was a personal awakening. It was about understanding the power of owning what I created, whether it was in tech art or any field. We live in a world where people constantly take what they can, leaving the creators behind. But owning your work, claiming your worth, and making sure you're recognized for it, that's where true power lies. I had let others dictate my worth for far too long, but now I knew better. Now I understood that my creations were mine, and I had the power to decide who got to benefit from them. What struck me the most in all of this was how little people like me are often valued. We're told that it's all about the bigger picture, that it's not about credit, it's about the team. But when you give everything to the team and they take it without ever giving you what you deserve, it's no longer just about the work. It's about respect. And that's something I learned I had to demand, not just ask for, but take. Now I walk away with more than just a victory. I walk away with the confidence to trust myself. I've proven that even the underdog can rise up and win. And for anyone out there who feels overlooked or dismissed, I want them to know this: your work, your ideas, your intellectual property, they matter. Stand up for them. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worth it, because the moment you recognize your own value, the world will follow. In the end, this journey wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them suffer. It was about reclaiming my power, taking control of my future, and knowing that I am worth far more than I ever let myself believe. And that lesson, that's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. So, what about you? Have you ever felt like your hard work went unnoticed, like you were being taken for granted? Maybe you've been in a situation where your ideas were stolen or your contributions weren't acknowledged. I want to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about the importance of standing up for yourself and protecting what you've created. We all have moments where we feel small, but we also have the power to reclaim our worth. If my story has resonated with you, or if you feel inspired to take action in your own life, I encourage you to hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Let's build a community that celebrates the power of ownership, self-worth, and taking control of your story. It's time we all recognize the value in what we bring to the table.